to come live with us. I've sent him the link. I think he just needs to pop into the chat, and then I can probably pull him up. I'm not entirely sure. This is the first time I've done a go live together, so I apologise to everyone who's going to watch the beginning few seconds of this. So I think he just needs to enter the live chat. There we go. Fabulous. I think. There we go. Assalamu alaikum, brother. You look
How are
amazing.
you?
I'm pleased to see you. I wasn't entirely sure this was going to work, brother. I was
I
a bit
wasn't sure. I wasn't sure either. You sent me the link. I had to figure it away, but alhamdulillah, we're here.
Yeah, no. So I think another way you can use this, just for your reference, so we have a bit of an idea, is you can go the live straight away. As guests come in, you can then add them up through the actual add the guest live. So I just think that was a hell of a lot easier from that point of view. But it was a bit of a fumble.
Okay.
It was a bit of a fumble. But I must admit, I'm glad I've managed to get you live. You're looking very relaxed.
Thank you.
You are looking a lot more relaxed now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my backup phone. I've got a live set up for here, and I'm just going to set this live up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and draw people from TikTok to our live discussion to see if we
All
can
right,
get.
sounds good.
Yeah.
I think first things first.
Absolutely.
Congratulations are in order. Mashallah is in order. Celebrating 2 years as a revert to
Yeah,
Islam.
I know. I was kind of shocked myself, brother. I was. It's been a bit of up and down. I must admit, it's been a bit of a rough to some degree.
Yes.
It's been. I've had some doubts. I've had issues, etc., etc. And in many ways, it's had its implications. If that makes sense. I'm kind of like coming forward and going backwards in what I'm doing in the Deen of Allah Subhanahu. It has been something for me to be discovered. Every time I learn something new, I take a step back, read, go again, come forward, come back. And that's the way I've generally looked at it. I mean, you've been a Muslim a long time, haven't you?
8 years now. 8 years. So I converted to Islam, reverted to Islam back in 2014. So
Damn.
and the journey was very similar. Like the first couple of years, starting out as a new Muslim, and I think the way that I accepted Islam was different than a lot of people, because what a lot of people do is they say their shahada in front of the entire masjid, right? And then you get
No,
takbir.
I was a lot more private. I was a lot more private than that, brother. I did mine very privately.
Yeah,
I did
so
mine.
I commend you for that, because I think, and this is just my own personal feeling, is that our community, mashallah, they're so well-meaning, and they want to embrace their new brother in Islam. But I feel like a lot of people really get overwhelmed with people trying to tell you
Yeah,
how to be Muslim,
yeah.
right? And so you get a
To
lot
be
of.
fair, that was one of the roughest 4 or 5 months. The first start coming in, brother, was
Oh,
uncompletely
absolutely.
rough.
Like, you got to do this, you got to do that, read this book, check out this sheikh, and it's like you don't even know like who to trust or whatever, right? So
No, I
the
know it's
best,
mad. It's
what
mad.
what I did, and so if anyone sees this who's thinking about becoming
Yeah, no, like
Muslim,
I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to when we're finished, brother, I will download this video and then send it to you so you can upload it yourself, so that we
sure,
both have the content. So that we both lose nothing from that point of view.
yeah,
The reality is we both lose nothing in the concept of music. So what I want to do with this live, brother, is for people to come in, ask questions about Islamic finance and stuff like that from both my supporters and yours, and then we can discuss it. And of course, I prefer to do general political events involving the Muslim world, because I don't like speaking about Islamic fiqh and that, because a lot of people do that and yet they know little bits, and then when they get it wrong, this is one of the reasons why I keenly try to avoid things like fiqh law and like hadiths, etc., because I just so many people on both YouTube, TikTok, that lot, they act as if they're sheikhs, but they're not. They're generally not, because
yeah,
90% of the sheikhs don't come
and
anywhere near social media.
yeah, and absolutely, and I think before I answer any question, just understand that I'm not a scholar.
No, no, exactly.
I'm a businessman first. I run my own company here in Canada called Canadian Islamic Wealth, And it's just really about trying to use the systems that are available to us as
Absolutely,
Muslims, whether that's in Canada or the UK or the United States or wherever, but doing so in a halal way, right? So
absolutely.
if you go to your standard bank in Canada or your standard bank in the UK, your standard bank in the US, they likely have some advisors who will sit down with you and say, okay, to save up for education, you should do this. To save up for retirement, you should do that. To save up for
So I
tax,
mean, if
you
you're
should
going
do
to
that.
give if you're going to give basic just basic free over the counter advice that you give to anybody who'd ask you before you financially give these financial advice, what would be the top thing as a halal investor on what you'd expect Muslims in the West to do? I mean, what would be the basics involving seeking
Yeah.
investment?
So
So
I
that when
mean,
I
I
post
think
this, my
yeah, I
well,
think the first thing that everybody should do is, and this is easier said than done, but try to live a life debt free.
mm,
Because debt in the West, especially, but everywhere really, debt involves interest, right? So whether you are going to school to study and you need to take a student loan, or you have a credit card, and believe me, it is hard to live your life without a credit card, especially if you plan to rent a car or to get a hotel or anything like that. Like you need to have one, right? But doing absolutely everything in your power to live a debt-free life, I would say, is probably the number one thing I would suggest to any and every Muslim out there, right? And
absolutely, absolutely.
where there's a will,
I
there
mean,
is
and
a way.
I personally, I'm where I am, where I live. I don't, unfortunately, I don't, because I've come from a revert situation where I didn't know the consequences around it. I'm still paying it off now.
Alhamdulillah.
In complete transparency. So there is no perfected position. But for me, it was coming from not knowing what riba was, not knowing what Islamic principles were on debts and debt, and then coming into Islam and go, I've got this, and I've got to get rid of it.
Yeah, well, you know what, and the thing is, right? It's not so for sort of the younger people out there and people who don't have any debt, keep it out of your life, right? I'm a revert too.
Yeah,
I converted to Islam when I was about 2 3 years out of university, right? So I still had student loans and I had credit cards and I had a line of credit. I had all this stuff, right? And as one thing I think you'll find is that as you sort of make that commitment to stay out of debt and stay away from interest, you will find that you have more money. Like,
mm,
and I
mm,
don't, I think this is possibly a gift from Allah. Again, I'm not a scholar. Possibly a gift from Allah, but also it's a spending thing as well, right? Because
yeah,
we have credit cards, right? It's so easy to just go up to something, boop. I don't know if you guys have
yeah.
Tap in the UK, but
No,
we
we
have
do, we do, we
yeah,
do.
so we have Tap where you can just like $2, $5, $10, $20, 30, whatever, right here and
And
there, and you end up spending,
yeah,
four or
before you
five
know,
hundred dollars more,
yeah, yeah,
right?
on the end of your month, and you're not even aware it's happening. You're not even
Yeah,
financially aware it's happening. It's mad.
it's a lot. But if you have so one thing that I did, and one thing I encourage a lot of people to do is get a prepaid Visa or Mastercard or something like this, because every time you have to spend money, you have to make, usually, unless you load it up with tons and tons of money anyway, but usually you have to say, okay, I've got to move $100 from my checking account onto this prepaid card, right? And just that act of having to like go through this, I would say two, three
Yeah,
step
yeah.
process to be able to spend money, you're gonna be like, do I really want to buy that? Like, I have to do
Do
this,
I
and then I
need
got to
it?
do that, and then I
So,
got to do that.
it teaches you to learn what you actually need, and that's quite critical
Absolutely.
when it comes to money. So, I mean, if it's food, if it's shopping, if it's bills, if it's stuff that you will need, absolutely. But you're not going to use it for buying tax. You're not buying it for fulfilling like, I just need that new does my current T-shirt work? Yes. I mean, I'm still, these are gym outfit stuff, and I'm still wearing them because I don't need any new ones. It's
Yeah.
people need to realize that you don't need to buy the new Nike Air Jordans. You don't need to buy any of this garbage that the West pumps out day after day, and they're using terrible labour. I mean, Indonesia makes up something like 40% of most of the shoes inside Western society. I think it's about
Mm,
like 45, 50% of these. And they're paid pennies or cents, I think is what it's called in Canada, for the time that they take them to assemble a shoe, and then it gets it slapped its market, and it's sold for 60, 70, some of them £80 in the shops. It's madness. It's
yeah.
madness level of profit.
Well, I mean, it's insane. And then the other thing too is that you end up in situations where you have like you're spending money on things that you don't need. But this is capitalism at its core, is that you
Yeah,
will never be satisfied until, right? And
yeah,
it's this endless pick. You won't be happy unless you have our shoes. You won't be happy unless you have the latest iPhone or the latest
yeah, yeah,
Samsung. You won't be
yeah.
happy. And what does Islam say to us about this? It's like, no, you only find contentment in Allah subhanahu wa
In Allah
ta'ala.
subhanahu.
That's
Yeah,
it.
exactly. And I mean, and
So
when people realize this, and I mean, when you take away the distractions that the Western society gives you, and there are a lot of them, it's like they're inventing new distractions every day. You end up then realizing that you're turning back to Quran, you're turning back to the knowledgeable scholars that you enjoy. You are turning back towards the masjid, and that's exactly how society should be. Because the more we place the masjid at the heart of our communities and our own individual well-being, the more the fitness starts to drop to the side. Because we're watching, we're observing, we're behaving around this community. Now, there are communal level problems, obviously, but getting people back towards, especially in the West, concentrating back towards community Muslim values inside of our grouping is incredibly important. And I think moving away from capitalistic or spending rifts, Black Friday is one of those things I hate. My sister's Christian, and I tell her only buy what you absolutely need for the children.
yeah,
A single present each. Don't go crazy. Don't go crazy on Christmas dinner. Alhamdulillah, don't do that. Don't do that. Do that. Just spend what you need. And even
mm,
then, she says to me, even though I'm not Muslim, she goes, I understand why you're saying this. I said, in the long run, it will save you money. I said, everything that Islam is 85% ethics and about 15, 20% rules. I said, and when you look at the ethics around Islamic spending, you understand how, it benefits you in the long run whilst you're
yeah,
on this earth, this dunya. I mean,
absolutely. And I just want to
hold
add to that, like Islam is a religion of the middle path, right? There's countless
on.
hadith and sayings that we are people of the middle path, right? So, there's hadith and things in the Quran that say, spend in the way of Allah, but don't spend yourself into poverty, right? We are encouraged to give from our wealth, but the Prophet said, as like when we die, as an example in our will, we're not supposed to give more than 30% away, and the rest should be left to our family and our relatives,
Families, yeah,
right?
yeah.
There's hadith about being miserly. There's hadith about being extravagant, right? And it's all about like there's nothing wrong with spending. There's nothing wrong with wearing nice clothes. There's nothing wrong with wearing nice perfume. But it's when those things become an obsession
Your
and become
obsession, yeah,
a core
yeah,
part of what you are, and you're trying to show
absolutely.
off to people that you're doing good because you're driving a Mercedes or you've got
أعوذ
an
بالله من
Armani
الشيطان
suit
الرجيم.
or any of these type of things. Like that's when it becomes a problem, right?
Oh no, absolutely, brother. And in that regard, I completely agree with you. It is the nature of the beast when it comes towards Islamic financing. I mean, so for my viewers, could you give a little bit of a background on how you built your business? I mean, it's an Islamic business, and I'm personally quite fascinated how you
Yeah.
construct. How did you get that together? Give us a bit of a background about your
So
how
I
you
mean
built.
the journey kind of starts before I even converted to Islam. I graduated university with a history degree because I was kind of because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I thought law, and then I got to the end of my degree and I realized that there's so much reading involved. I don't want to have to argue for a living, like all this other kind of stuff. And I'm like, forget it. I'm not interested in pursuing this. So
Absolutely, absolutely.
I got a job just doing like cold calling for this financial advisor at a bank. Right. And he was a young guy, like 27, 28 at the time. I was in my early 20s. And I was getting him some good results, so he kept me on, and I got benefits, I got all this other kind of stuff. And then, but I wasn't happy making that kind of money, so I asked him like, okay, so how do I do what you do, right? And he said, you're not going to do what I do. You've got a history degree. I'm like, okay, no, but seriously, like, so I would bug him every single day for about a year, and then he's like, okay,
Okay.
fine. Like he he showed me how to get all my licenses, get all this stuff, whatever. And then in 2014, I kind of started my own financial advisory practice. And then
Okay.
later on in that year, I converted to Islam. And so,
about to be a man to sell all the filthy millions to everyone, and then he changes religion and cuts out
well,
part of
so
it.
exactly, right? And so, after I had done this, I'm like, well, I've got this newfound community. I just met a whole bunch of people. Like, let's go talk to them, right? And then so I'm asking around. I'm like, hey, so do you guys want to become clients? Like, I'm an investment advisor at this bank. Like, would you be interested? And they're all like, no, we don't want to invest with the bank. I'm like, why? They're like, well, because of interest. I'm like, what the hell does that mean? So they
Yeah.
like showed me in the Quran what it all says. I'm like, huh, okay. So I got to find a way to find these customers. And so I'm doing research, and I'm finding that there's a bunch of there's nobody really who like specializes in this niche, right? So I'm starting to like learn about it. I'm getting certifications. I'm doing all this type of stuff, and lo and behold, like they come along at this bank and they say, you know what, we don't think this is going to make any money. So I move on to another large institution. I'm there for 4 years. I build up a business. Like we had a few $1 million under management over there. But
Nice.
again, they kind of come along and say, you know what, I don't know if this is going to make money. We don't really want this at our firm, right? And it's one of these things where this is kind of liberal ideology 101, is that they want everybody who looks different to feel included, but anytime you want to actually say or do something different, that's what they don't like, right?
Yeah, they want inclusion. They don't want inclusion of ideas.
Exactly. No differentiation in ideas. So then in 2019, I kind of saw this, and I'm like, you know what? The only way I'm ever going to be able to truly do something like this is if I'm independent. So I left the big firm, one kid and another baby on the way, alhamdulillah, and I decided to start Canadian Islamic Wealth. And pandemic hits right after that, and whatever. But alhamdulillah, like we survived. So we're technically 3 years in, and we've got about 11 million in assets under management, which is like not a huge number, but it's only halal. So I'm pretty happy about that.
No, brother, that's amazing. If you've got 11 million in assets, when you take into account that it's halal, that's incredible. Especially in a Western country. Do not discredit the amount of work it must have taken to get 11 million. I mean, we share the same passions when it comes towards agreeing that lot. So, in essence, what you've done is you've turned yourself into a historian or historically trained. What did you study history-wise, if you don't mind me asking?
In history, I did a specialization in Latin American stuff, so stuff on like the Aztecs, the Incas, all the way up till colonization and independence. I don't remember much of it, to be honest with you, but I passed and got my degree in it. So
I know nothing about the time period. Not sausage.
Yeah. So I actually wanted to ask you about something, because you come from a Christian background, and one of the things that fascinates me, and I always kind of bring up to friends of mine who are Christian and who are Jewish, that the Bible says pretty clearly that usury and interest are things that are not allowed. So why is it that we're the only ones who kind of
I already figured what you're saying, brother. I already figured. The point that we have is Pope Usury, one of the popes of Usury, about around the 14th century. He was one of the most vocal people who disagreed with usurage, etc., etc. It was him being blackmailed by the Archbishop of, the Archduchy of Austria, before they were the Holy Roman Empire, and the Venetian bankers, that they would take the whole of Rome, that they would cross effectively the equivalent of the Christianical Rubicon and appoint their own popes if he didn't back down from the banking. These are records that are quietly held still in the Vatican to this day. So it was around 1450 to 1460 that they stopped preaching about usurage.
I don't know this history that well, but this was the Pope that tried to take on the Medicis, yeah?
Yeah, basically. Okay. He was the one crossing the Medicis. And when he was bankrupt, financially bankrupt, when the investor bankers and much of the actual city-state, alongside the backing of the Austrian Archduchy, just before their rise to imperial power, which was on the back of the money of the Medici. So the Austrians offered them the Medici did military. The Medici broke the power of the papacy in the northern Italians. Then the Medici used the enormous Italian city-state money to finance the Austrian emperors effectively
Mhm.
which created the Archduchy of Austria. So this is where we know that Eurosai basically was the last real pope who spoke out about usage. From there, from about 1400s onwards, you don't see a great deal of it in the papacy. You see
Yeah.
almost none of it. And this is because of the blackmail and the threats. Before that, credit due, the Catholic Church tried very hard to ban usage. This is why it was quite often, and this is a misconception in modern time periods, why people say the Jews all the Milan. I'm not saying that I believe this, how Jews are money lenders, how they own all the big banks and all the other conspiracy garbage that goes with it. But the problem being is in medieval time periods, the Jewish nation, the Jewish people inside Christianity were the money lenders because no one would genuinely do that job. It's a dirty job back in the medieval period of Christianity. So this is one of those reasons where the psychological mindset of the Jews rule the banks and the banks rule the world kind of garbage comes from. The problem being is it's actually more in line towards Medici, modernization of modern banking, usage being no longer acknowledged and tolerated, if you like, from the church's point of view, where the church dropped its objections. You see, we as the Muslims didn't do that, but this is quite recent Christianical history. It's only like 500-600 years old, relatively speaking. Beforehand, the church and most of the Christianical world was more in line with the Muslim world, when basically usage was completely disregarded. And it is a historical travesty, relatively speaking, because the Medicis with the Austrians had the firepower to basically say, we will replace you. And these
Yeah.
records are held in the Vaticinian Library as of now, of the threats made, the letters that were made threatening to the Pope. They're not publicly acknowledged these
Yeah,
days
well, it,
because
it,
it's
it
considered
it makes
politically
sense, and
incorrect.
even some of the Jewish folks that I know, like what they've said is that within their tradition, and again, like I don't know this for a fact, but this is just a few people I've spoken to. They have something similar that prohibits interest, but it only applies that if you're lending to other people who are Jewish, right? Like if
Yeah,
you if you
yeah,
if
yeah,
you lend
yeah,
to a Christian person or a Muslim person or a pagan or whatever, you can charge them interest. You just can't charge another Jewish person. That's
yeah,
what they've
yeah, yeah,
said to
yeah.
me.
And to be fair, their control of the banking world, which did exist in the pre-1400s, practically collapsed once the Pope stopped objecting towards the northern Italian merchant principalities becoming lenders. And then it spread into north southern France, and then it just rocketed across the entirety of Europe by about 1600s. So in
Yeah,
Europe, everyone had a banker. And this is where the so-called effective money lending monopoly of the Jewish nation, of Jewish enclaves, vanished because these massive banking plans erupted. I mean, people go on about some of the current banking plans, being the fact that they've got Jewish relations and all the other conspiracy theories. But in reality, the banking world was erupted by the collapse of the church objection, by threat of Austrian and Medici, Northern Italian and military arms. And that was the realistic capacity of it. Otherwise, Christianity, like Islam, and like when you're thinking, because the Jews only consider the Jews to be their people, and they can do anything they like with anyone else from a religious point of view. Usage is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala disagrees with it entirely. And God shows that towards all of humanity in that regard. But I mean,
yeah.
it's quite fascinating when you realise that halal banking is. I mean, how big is it outside? Is it even big in the Middle East? Do they? I mean, I've been told that most of the Middle East still banks relatively internationally, especially when
So
it comes towards the oil barons.
yeah, so I mean, I think there's kind of layers that needs to be unpacked when you have that discussion because first of all, like everywhere in the world that uses like a central banking fiat system, right? So to have anything that's purely 100% halal banking, I think we need to understand that given the way currency works in the world, like you're never
Yeah,
going to find that. So even if you have a halal mortgage lender who does things 99 or 95%
yeah.
correctly, right? There still is that tie to the global economic system, which will
Well, the
make it
system. Yeah,
impossible to kind of
yeah,
complete that last 5%. So I think anyone out there who's kind of listening and like, oh, I want to do halal, but there's no real halal option. It's like, and there never will be unless the central banking system completely vanishes, right? Which would there'd be economic chaos, probably a global depression, probably some wars to go along with that, bloodshed, yada yada yada, right? So I think we need to understand that aspect. But it is a very big, and it's a heavily growing industry. Like some of the biggest, most high volume banks in the world are in places like Malaysia and the Middle East and different things like that, because they've got people from all over the world who are Muslim who want their deposits to earn something, but they don't want to earn it off of interest. And so Islamic banking has a very interesting system on how they do this, right? So and one of the things that a lot of people say, and this is a misconception, they're like, oh, Islamic banking, it's just a different name. It's like, no, they truly actually do things differently. Like, so for the first thing a lot of people say, an objection that they have is like the banks get their money from other interest-based banks. So no, they don't. They get their money from depositors. That's where all banks get the grand majority of their money to lend out to people, is from people like you and me taking our money, and we put it back into the we put our money into a checking account at the bank, and then the bank takes that money and they combine it into different loans and different things like that. And then usually what happens from that is those loans get sold into secondary markets, et cetera, et cetera. Where instead of lending it, actually do things like purchase, right, and give out rental agreements and different things like that. And so every single time that someone makes a payment for those rental agreements, depositors get a small portion of that rent that people are paying, or a small portion of the land payments that people are paying, or whatever. But they actually will buy a hard asset and then lease it out to someone, or have a business transaction or different things like that. So that's kind of how it works in a very sort of high level simplistic way.
Fantastic. Someone just asked a question. Give me a second. I just want to try and where is that? Where is that question? Someone asked a question. Is Islamic banking fractionally reserved? Someone's asking live from C.
I don't know. Probably. Like if it's based off if every single Islamic bank in the world likely has to, in some way, shape, or form, be tied to central banks, and so if that's the case, like they probably function using fractional banking and things like that. I mean, I wouldn't know for sure. Like you'd have to look at sort of their internal operations, the documents, to know exactly, but it's highly likely. And another thing that you guys all need to understand is that most of the banks, even if they are Islamic and do things the correct way, they probably still also have to use things like LIBOR or global interest rates and things like that to calculate out what their profit margins are going to be. And I know a lot of you guys have a problem with that, but it's just a fact that they need to know this stuff in order to put enough margin on there so that they can pay their employees, keep their doors open, keep their depositors happy, keep their investors happy, everything like that, right? So a lot of you guys on different social media platforms come and yell at me and be like, oh, it's all fake, this is what they're doing. It's like, okay, they're gouging me. No, they're not. They need to keep their doors open, guys. Like they don't have one of the reasons why Walmart is so successful and banks are so successful at lending and all these things, it's called volume, right? So if they can issue $1 billion of conventional mortgages, they can afford to offer you lower rates than someone who only issues one, right?
So absolutely.
We just need to understand those facts that Islamic banking, Islamic finance
I think the encouragement there, brother, is more Muslims who go to Islamic banks. We would grow the industry to be able to support the people around us.
Absolutely.
And I think that's definitely something that we need to do more of. We definitely need to be seen speaking about it, because my point of view, and I have a fundamental view in that regard, is we have to support the industrial system together. Ben Equus, salam alaikum. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Salam alaikum.
But the rating system is applicable. I mean, really, Muslims need to move from the Western economics, where we are required to use the international banking system, to where there is enough of us physically inside the Muslim banking system that we would no longer need to use it. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm sure there will be a critical mass period at some point economically where we could be big enough that we don't need to use their system. where we could just say no, thank you. We'll take our 2 billion population and we'll
Well,
go off this
so
way. Thank you.
this is actually interesting. So this is kind of a global monetary shift that appears to be going on with the BRICS nations, right? So Brazil, Russia, I think India, China. I forget who the S is. Maybe South Africa. I don't know. But
I
what
think
they're
South
talking.
Africa is in that.
Yeah, I think what they're
Yeah,
talking about is creating a global reserve currency or something like that, that actually goes back on the gold standard, right? And so that'll really piss off the West and kind of everything that we're about. So it'll be interesting because a economy tied to, and again, I'm not a scholar, not an expert. This is just what I've read on
of
the
course, of
subject
course.
here. An economy tied to a global or a gold standard, I believe that deals with issues of things like inflation um, and all that kind of stuff. So,
Yes,
yeah,
Ben,
that
it's
is,
the new, it's 2 seconds, my man. Yes, Ben, this is the new live go together system. Me and Jess are just trying it out for the first time, and I thought I would invite Jess so we could get an idea of what Islamic banking is. Can you see the questions by any chance, Jess, or am I the only one who's seeing them?
I can see them. I can see them too. They pop up here.
Okay,
An economy tied to a
okay.
gold standard is good. An economy tied to indirectly to a gold standard, though, some international currency is problematic. Yeah, so I mean, like, I think the gold standard, again, I'm no economist, but gold standards would deal with a lot of the inflation issues that we're having, and it would certainly align more with Islamic values and principles. So, Allah knows best. I don't really know what to make of that, but it's just one of those things that with the central banking system, like the money is not tied to anything other than usually debt. And some people have said it's tied to like petrodollars, things like that. Again, this is not my area of expertise, but what I would
No, no,
say
of
is
course
that
not.
in the Islamic sort of banking system, or in like the ideal situation, and I just want to go back because there was a question by a brother
Certainly,
who
brother.
basically said, what are you talking about when it comes to lower rates? And so what I mean by lower rates is, so you can take the word rate for what it is, right? With a conventional bank, when we say rates, we mean interest rates. When I'm talking about Islamic bank, and I'm talking about one that does things the right way, we're talking about rates of profit, right? But if you're wanting a lower rate of profit, um, from an Islamic bank, volume is probably going to be at least a
Volume
factor
is
in being
critical.
able
Yeah, no, I
to
would have
lower
thought
down
volume
those
would have been
rates, right?
critical. Yeah, I would have thought volume would be absolutely critical. The more customers we have, the more Muslims we have in an Islamic bank, the stronger the bank is. I mean, that's
Yeah,
the same with Muslim communities. The more Muslims we have, the stronger the community is, the more powerful its
that's right.
voice is. This is quite interchangeable from a human point of view as it would be from a banking point of view. The more of us there is supporting each other, supporting each other's businesses, the better equipped we are as a society to ride out some of the rest of the West's fitna. And I fully encourage anything that moves us to an Islamic model of finance, definitely. Because let's be fair, Allah subhanahu makes war with those who make profit out of interest. And we'd like to
Yeah,
avoid that.
absolutely, and it's a war you can't win. So I'm going to tell you guys a story, right? So this is, and you can look around and see this for yourself. But there are like people whose lives are completely, I would say immersed in interest, right? So look at, and you probably know people like this, right? Who go and they get an interest based mortgage, right? And so what does the Quran say about that? Like it describes interest as people who double and redouble their wealth through
Mm.
this means, right? Well, look at your standard mortgage, and by the way, rates have been the lowest they've ever been in the last 10 years. Right now, they're back up, but if you look over the lifetime of a mortgage in Canada, the maximum time is about 25 years. I think in the U.S. you can do 30 or 40, something like this, whatever, right? But
Britain,
if
they're
you look
talking
at
about,
it,
but in Britain, they're talking about multi generational. They're talking about 100-year mortgages now.
so
Madness,
100-year
mad.
mortgage. But look at what happens by the end of that loan. Like within that 25-year period, you're paying at least double than what you borrowed. That's in
Yeah,
Canada. In the UK, it's probably the same. In the US, it's probably similar, right? So this is exactly what the Quran is talking about. That the money ends up doubling because these people are charging interest. Like that's what happens. But look on the personal side of things too. Have you met a friend who they always seem to have a little bit of money? They always seem to have decent things. They always used to be able to kind of go out and enjoy themselves, right? But then they get a mortgage. And then every extra dollar they have is it's servicing that debt. It's buying something for the house. Something breaks down. You're putting more money into it. It's just all like you have an asset, but your house poor, right?
Yeah.
And this is what happens to so many people is that you're trapped and you're trapped into this this is the point I made about the Yasser Qadi post the other day that you're stuck. So
So I do have an Islamic question. Is it halal to purchase things like houses and to use them as rent as assets? So if I had the financial means to purchase outright a house and then put it on for people to rent as a home to live in, how is there a halal way of doing it?
yeah,
Owning property,
that's totally fine. Like assuming the method you used to purchase the house is fine. Like you bought it cash and then you rented it out, 100%. That's fine.
Okay, so I mean that's an important thing because I think the idea that there is a Muslim perception to avoid owning assets because people seem to think that it's similar to trying to own the wealth of Western society. I would think to encourage young men to make up enough savings to purchase assets and to use that in a halal method. And if it's halal to, if you paid it from your earnings, your workings, your income from wherever you're doing your sweat your brow kind of work, then
Well,
why
I
not
mean,
just do
let's look at the Islamic history, right? Let's look at the narrative. So, first of all, nothing wrong with paying rent. If you bought a house outright, or you used a halal means of acquiring the house to get that house, and then you rent it out for profit, there's nothing wrong with that. Let's understand that one of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's jobs, he was a merchant. He was a merchant for Khadija before they got married, right? And Allah
that?
subhanahu wa ta'ala said in chapter 2, verse 275 of the Quran that trade is acceptable, well, riba is forbidden. And a lot of you guys out there, you come to me and you say, oh, it's the same thing. It's like, no, Allah has made a very clear distinction between the two.
Trade
And
is not riba. Yes, absolutely.
trade is not riba. Trade is not riba. If I take an apple for $1 and sell it to you for $2, and that's probably a ripoff of an apple, or it might be the most delicious apple ever. But it's still a halal transaction if you voluntarily, buy that apple, right?
Yeah.
And so, if we extrapolate that to other things, if I buy a car for 10,000 and sell it for 12,000, that's totally fine too. If I buy a Apple Watch for I don't even know how much those cost, $200 and sell it for 300, that's fine
I
too.
have no idea. I don't use Apple Watches.
Yeah.
I have one mobile, and I just don't know how to work that thing.
So we need to understand that having wealth and acquiring wealth and all these things are not haram by any means. And if you look, what was his name? One of the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'm blanking on his name right now. He was a businessman, and even in a lot of the time after like the battle of, I believe it was the battle of Badr, he captured a couple people and he was like going to sell them into slavery to make some money, like, or sell them back to the Quraysh or something like this. I forget the details, but the whole point is that doing things to make money as long as it's halal is totally fine.
So, I mean, of the 5 people we've got in here currently, anybody want to ask any questions of Jess? I'm very happy with this live so far. What about yourself, brother?
Yeah, it's going well.
Is Islamic banking controlled by the IMF, Jess? Is Islamic banking controlled by the IMF?
That's a tough question. So I mean,
I
optically,
think a better question, brother. A better question is: do Islamic banks have to obey the IMF rules?
Probably. I mean, again, not my area of expertise, but if every single Islamic bank currently that exists on the planet is tied to central banks in some way, shape, or form, and subsequently is tied to international money, the IMF, internet, like basically global money standards, different things like that. So it would be, I would, again, I don't know for sure, but I would be hard pressed to figure that there's an Islamic bank out there that somehow isn't tied to all those same
Fair
things.
Enough. I mean, to be fair, and we need to make a distinction. The Muslim world lives inside the Western world today. We don't have the ability to disattach ourselves. We do not have a caliph. We do not have a unified ummah to the same standards we did, say, just 250 years ago. As problematic as we have with our Turkish cousins, Islamic cousins, with what fitna they engaged in, they were still a caliphate. They were still very much the center historically. The Western world would come to Turkey to talk to the Muslim world when they wanted to talk to them. So we were more centralized 200 years ago than we are today. So realistically, that is a problem. We don't have that level of centralism that we can ignore things like the IMF and the international community. We just can't. We don't have that
Yeah.
ability anymore.
And I mean, I think so. And for all the skeptics out there, right? Because there's a lot of you, and I get it, right? It's like, okay, the thought process is, why am I paying more for something that ultimately, like, I pay the same amount? It's tied to the central banks. It's tied to, all this stuff, right? And the answer to that is, you do what you can control, right? You do what you
Yeah,
can control. I can't control how the government is going to tax my money. I can't control what the Central Bank of Canada is going to do for monetary policy. I can't control any of that. What I can control is the transactions that I engage in, right? So I can choose
absolutely.
to I can choose to rent if I can't afford to buy a house. That's a halal transaction. Even if the guy who owns the property has a interest-based mortgage, that's not my problem. That's his problem. He's going to have to answer
Yeah,
to God for that. I have to answer to God for what I'm doing, right? So, making that
absolutely.
doing your investigations, that if you find a halal mortgage, do a little bit of due diligence. You don't have to be an expert, and if it seems legitimate, again, the blame is not on you, but you do have to ask yourself a few things, like, okay, is this interest? Am I paying interest? Like, or did this company actually buy the property and is reselling it to me, right? If this part of the transaction between you and the Islamic bank is proper, then you've got nothing to worry about. Or if a scholar
Mm.
came along and gave a fatwa that said, this is halal, and you were misled by whatever that scholar said, again, that's on him. That's not on you, right? So you do your best on the things that you can
As
control.
lay
But
followers, we do due diligence, but we're not always responsible for everything going on around us.
no, I mean, you can't expect to be absolute experts and understand everything. And you know what? I'll tie this into what's the guy's name? Sam Bankman-Fried, right? And that whole FTX debacle. I'm sure some people lost money in the crypto space, whatever the case may be. And so, what I will say about that is, there's some people who made money trying to promote FTX and all this other type of stuff. And if they didn't do their due diligence on the guy, and people lost money, then yeah, they share some of that blame. But if everybody did their due diligence, right, and he presented it as this, like, honest way to get into this space and whatever, but then he kind of pulled the rug out from under everyone. The only person who's going to have to answer for that is him, right? And then the people involved. So it's one of these things. What would you do to someone who
Who
believes wealth
believes
is
wealth is
inherently evil?
inherently evil.
I'd say you're wrong. Wealth isn't inherently. You're wrong. Wealth isn't inherently evil. It's what you do with it that matters, and how you earned it that matters,
Evil,
right? So,
evil sits in the seed of man. As far as evil is in mankind, mankind has duly based ability to freely choose to be evil. So how you use your wealth is whether it's evil or not. It's not necessarily wealth magnitudes the person you are. Um, Accumulating wealth. If you are so what sister. If you are a kind person, money will make you an even kinder person, a more charitable person. If you are, yes, exactly, money is just a tool. And this is another thing that a brother said, Ashton brother. Money is just a tool. It's a tool, and it will exemplify who you are. So if you are at your core, you're a stingy, miserly person, money will amplify that. If you are
yeah,
a kind, loving Muslim person, money will not change the core person you are. It's just a tool to do a job. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put it here to test people's morality. And I truly believe that. I think the richer you are, you show yourself to be the person you are. I mean, this is why the Americans have this saying that it is their goal to get to you money, that you have the money to tell the world. I mean, what a couple of £1 million in the bank, economies in Japan or something like that, so you can tell the IMF and anyone else the F word. And that's the nature of how they see money. And that's why, because it's mass produced in media, that's the projection why people think money is evil.
yeah. Well, and I mean, like you said, money amplifies money will amplify your characteristics, right? And a lot of people, and this is sort of an Islamic concept, is that a lot of us think that we are being tested with poverty, or we are being tested with
If you're wealthy.
wealth. We're being tested with everything, right? Remember, like Allah's going to ask us on the day of judgment how we spent our wealth, right? If you don't have any wealth, you're not going to have to answer that question, right? You're going to be asked about other things like your prayer and your fasting and all the things you could control. If you didn't have any wealth, like you're not going to be asked about that. But if you're someone who has hundreds of millions or billions of dollars that you can use to the betterment of people, did you pay your zakat? Did you give? Did you help those? Did you help your brothers when their stomachs were empty? Right? You're going to be asked all of that stuff. So it can be a blessing. Like if you look at Uthman, who was the third Khalifa, right? There was a point where he donated to one of the expeditions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then the Prophet right then and there that day, like he said, "You don't have to do anything else. You are going to Jannah." Right? And he was still alive, and he still had, many more years to live. And he was assassinated, but he was the guy that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, like, "You've done enough. You're going to Jannah." I'm paraphrasing, of course, but that's
No, of
the
course.
story.
Absolutely. And I think people need to realize that our Prophet and their Sahaba were not poor men. They started,
No.
some of them were, some of the Sahaba were poor men. I mean, the beautiful singer of the Adan, our original brother, he was an ex-slave. But you know what I'm saying? Wealth is used for the benefit of Islam.
Yeah.
What is the source for that exactly? I think it's a hadith. I think the brother's
I believe it. I believe it's a hadith, but just look up the seerah of Prophet Muhammad. You can Google that. and look at the story. Excuse me. Look at the story of Uthman. It'll tell you all about that specifically. And
that's a good point, by the way. I should probably do the stories of Uthman and the other caliphs, which I haven't done yet. I must be honest.
Google the story because I'm certainly not doing it justice. And there's another example of the wealth that Uthman had that he used for good, where he purchased a well and he gave he let everybody come and use it for free, right? And so like there's tons and tons of blessings you can get from having wealth as long as you use it in a correct way. And I'll even use an example from a guy in my city, right? Like this guy, he's made it quite a good living, and he has basically been involved in opening and building every single masjid in the city in some way, shape, or form. Like, yeah, so he bought a building for our Somali community to have their masjid, and he's helped with 2 or 3 other masjids in the city. And so, like, imagine the amount of hasan that he gets every single time that people pray in there 5 times a day.
Yeah,
right?
No.
Imagine on Dua, imagine on Eid, imagine on whatever, right? So these are all continuous deeds. And then after he dies, he's still going to get good deeds for everybody that prays in that masjid, right? So,
definitely. I think there's one of the things I would like to do is build my own, be part of the actual construction of a masjid. I would personally like to do that. I would like to be part of the construction of a masjid, be a part of, building the walls or feeding them because I've got my chefing skills whilst they're doing the build. You know what I'm saying? Be a part of the construction of it. Not necessarily the finance, but actually be a part of the actual building of a masjid.
Right, yeah, isn't this amazing how just Allah is? That and how fair Allah is, that this guy who helped finance it, he's getting the deeds, but the people who are hammering the nails and actually putting up the thing, like, they get the good deeds for it too.
Alhamdulillah. So, I know it's magnificent in that regard, definitely. What was that question? I didn't see it. I'll look at that one again. I meant the ultimate story you're paraphrasing. What would I look for up for that particular segment?
Just look up Prophet Muhammad promises Uthman Jannah or paradise, whatever. Look that up. The story should be the first thing that pops up.
Yeah, fantastic. Any other basic Islamic wealth advice you would pass anybody from this life, brother?
Yeah. So I think everybody, if you follow these sort of, I would call them 4 or 5 steps, just whatever you're doing, you're going to be better off in that. The first step, and probably the most important one, is don't forget to pay your zakat. Zakat is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. If you look throughout the Quran, the 2 things that are listed together are salah and zakat. Salah and zakat. So if you have the means to give, you must give. This is not a choice. This is not optional. It is a requirement. And if you have the money to do so, pay your zakat. The minimum you need is about $5,000 give or take. So do that. Number 2 is to stay out of debt. Stay out of debt as much as you possibly can. If there is a way that you can borrow, like if you do need to borrow some money, if there's a way you can borrow it from a friend or a community member, someone who knows you, who trusts you, and avoid interest, please, but try to do that as much as you possibly can. Number 3, even if you have a little bit of debt, still you need to start building up an emergency fund. 5 to 10% of every paycheck you earn should be going to an emergency fund until you have about 3 months worth of your expenses. Even if you still have debt, a lot of people think, no, I got to pay the debt first. No, emergency fund is almost as or more important than paying off debt. And the reason I say that is because if you're paying off a credit card or you're paying a phone bill or you're paying any of these type of things, and something happens, you can't call them and say, hey, I need some money back because whatever reason, right? So you need to have a cushion for yourself. Number 4 is once you've built up that emergency fund and once you've paid off debt, invest as much as you possibly can in a halal way. So in the UK, I don't know exactly what you guys have as far as accounts go, but I know you have things that are similar to us in Canada, which are like RSPs, tax-free saving accounts, different things like that. So you can open those accounts in and I'm sure you have actually in the UK you guys have something called Kestrel.io, which is an Islamic I think it's an Islamic investing platform or something like that.
What's it called, brother?
KESTRAL .io. So I think that's an Islamic investing platform in the UK that you guys have access to.
Very much.
So check that out and get started. Right, like it's almost 2023. Don't wait around. Don't whatever. Like, what are some steps? Think about at the end of this thing. What are some steps that you can do today or this week or tomorrow that'll get you on a better path? Right. There might not be anything you can do, but I'm sure there's something, and there's all something that we can do. Right.
Obviously.
And then the last thing I would say is that make sure that you're educating others, right, on some of the misconceptions, educating others on how to be financially literate in Western society, right? Like if we always just hide our money under our pillows and sit around and complain and whatever the case may be, like nothing's ever going to get done and nothing's ever going to change, right? So we've got to be the people to enact the change. We've got to be the people that say no to the interest-based banks and move our stuff into Islamic banks. We've got to be the people to say no to, buying investments in interest or alcohol or gambling or weapons or whatever. And we've got to be people who take active roles in the investments that we have. Right. A lot of the time we have jobs, and our jobs have pensions. Our jobs have retirement accounts that we contribute to, and we don't even ask any questions about, okay, how are these retirement accounts being used, right? And it's one thing that if your employer puts it in there and you have absolutely no say in how it gets invested, that's one thing. But most places now have what's called in Canada we call them defined contribution plans. I don't know what you guys call it, but most of us have a say in how the money at our work gets invested. We can choose the different funds in there. So maybe there's no halal option, but I'm sure maybe there's no halal option, but I'm sure there's a least bad option. Look for the one that doesn't contain anything in alcohol and gambling, tobacco. Maybe look for an investment that's in tech or healthcare or gold or something like this, right? Like all of these would at least avoid like the haram side of the investment. So those are the things that I would say. Like let's really try to take an active role and try to move our community, our society, our government, everyone around us towards the more halal option.
Absolutely. Brother, thank you. It's been a lovely hour having you. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm pleased that this has been a very constructive first time I've tried to use these come live together.
We had some viewers. It wasn't just the two of us talking to ourselves.
No, it wasn't. No, we had we had 6 to 10 people. I've been watching it. So yeah, if your site doesn't record it, I will send you a copy of this so you can upload it to your page, my brother. And I will just, as far as I'm concerned, and I will post it towards us. But it's been a pleasure having you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you everyone for coming for our live. been a pleasure having you all. Been a pleasure having Jess, and I think this has been very successful. Thank you as always, brother. Speak to you soon.
Have
And
a great day.
yourself.